The crisp autumn morning brought a gentle breeze as a tall, distinguished-looking black veteran made his way through the revolving doors of the Luxury Heights Hotel. His service dog, a well-trained German shepherd named Thunder, walked perfectly beside him, matching his every step. The dog's vest clearly identified him as a service animal, with patches that read "Working Dog," "Do Not Pet," and "Service Animal," access required by law. The veteran's military bearing was still evident in his posture, though his eyes held a weariness that spoke of battles fought both abroad and at home. After 3 tough tours in Afghanistan, he'd learned to rely on Thunder to help him navigate civilian life. The dog wasn't just a service animal, he was a lifeline, trained to recognize the early signs of PTSD episodes and provide immediate support. As they approached a front desk, other guests smiled appreciatively at the pair. A young child pointed at Thunder with excitement, but her mother gently reminded her that service dogs were working and couldn't be petted. The veteran smiled warmly at them, appreciating their understanding. The hotel lobby was a picture of luxury, with marble floors that clicked softly under Thunder's well-manicured paws. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and plush furnishings invited weary travelers to rest. The veteran had chosen this hotel specifically for its advertised military-friendly policies and excellent accessibility ratings. He reached into his leather messenger bag, pulling out his reservation details and service animal documentation, not that he needed to, as the ADA didn't require it, but experience had taught him to be prepared. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface of his veteran's ID and the folder containing Thunder's certification papers. The morning had started so well. He'd driven up from Virginia for a friend's wedding, looking forward to a peaceful weekend celebrating love and friendship. Thunder had been excellent during the drive, alert but calm, just as he'd been trained. They'd even stopped at their favorite roadside diner, where the staff always kept dog treats behind the counter for service animals. What happened next would turn this routine check-in into a viral moment that would spark a national conversation about discrimination, disability rights, and the treatment of veterans in America. But for now, the veteran stood at the counter, Thunder sitting perfectly at his side, waiting for the hotel manager to look up from her computer screen. Little did he know that this simple moment, something he'd done hundreds of times before at hotels across the country, was about to become anything but routine. The security cameras silently recorded as the hotel manager finally looked up, her expression shifting from professional politeness to something entirely different as her gaze fell on Thunder. The veteran could feel the change in the atmosphere, that familiar tension he'd experienced too many times before. His hand instinctively moved to Thunder's head, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. Thunder, sensing his handler's anxiety, pressed gently against his leg. A subtle reminder that they were in this together, just as they had been since the day they were matched at the Service Dog Training Center. The hotel manager's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the polished marble counter as she looked from the veteran to his service dog with undisguised skepticism. Her name tag gleamed under the lobby's crystal chandeliers, her position as general manager prominently displayed. "I'm sorry," she said, though her tone carried no trace of actual apology, "but we have a strict no-pets policy at this establishment." Her eyes narrowed as she glanced again at Thunder, who remained perfectly still beside his handler. The veteran took a deep breath, having faced this situation before. "Ma'am, Thunder isn't a pet. He's a certified service animal, protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act." His voice remained steady and professional as he reached for his documentation. But before he could even open the folder, the manager let out a dismissive laugh that echoed through the lobby. "Oh, please. Everyone claims their dog is a service animal these days. Just last week, someone tried to convince me their Chihuahua was an emotional support peacock." Several guests in the lobby turned to watch the interaction. The veteran noticed a couple quickly pulling out their phones, but he focused on maintaining his composure. Thunder pressed closer to his leg, sensing the rising tension. "I understand your concern," the veteran continued calmly, "but Thunder is specifically trained to assist with my PTSD from military service. I have all the required documentation right here." The manager cut him off with a wave of her hand. "PTSD? You look perfectly fine to me." Her voice dripped with sarcasm as she added, "And I suppose that expensive leather bag and designer shoes came from your military pension." The veteran's hand instinctively tightened on Thunder's leash, but the dog remained steady, doing exactly what he was trained to do, providing a calm, grounding presence. A small crowd had begun to gather, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly disturbed by the manager's behavior. "Ma'am," the veteran said, his military training evident in his continued professionalism, "not all disabilities are visible. I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan, and Thunder helps me." "Oh, now you're claiming military service too?" The manager interrupted again, her voice rising. "Listen, I've worked in luxury hotels for 15 years. I know when someone's trying to pull a fast one. This isn't some roadside motel where you can just walk in with any old dog and a fake vest from Amazon." The veteran stood straighter, years of military bearing kicking in. "I have a confirmed reservation, my service dog documentation, and my military ID. Under the ADA, you cannot legally deny us accommodation." The manager's face flushed red. "I can deny service to anyone I feel is misrepresenting themselves. For all I know, you bought that vest online and printed fake papers. That dog doesn't even look like a real service animal." At this point, Thunder, who had been trained at one of the most prestigious service dog academies in the country, remained in a perfect sit, completely contradicting her accusations. Several guests shook their heads in disbelief at the manager's behavior. An older couple nearby exchanged worried glances, the husband pulling out his phone and appearing to dial the hotel's corporate number. A young woman in a business suit had her phone held up, clearly recording the entire interaction. The veteran took another steady breath, Thunder providing the emotional support he needed to stay calm in the face of such blatant discrimination. "Ma'am, I'd like to speak with your supervisor or the hotel owner." The manager's laugh was harsh and cutting. "I am the general manager. There's no one else for you to complain to. Now, either leave the dog outside or find another hotel. Those are your options." The veteran stood his ground, though his heart was racing. Thunder responded to his rising anxiety by performing a trained response, gently leaning against his leg, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. The growing audience in the lobby watched as this scene unfolded, many of them wearing expressions of shock and dismay at the manager's behavior. What nobody realized yet was that this confrontation was about to explode far beyond the walls of this luxury hotel, touching off a nationwide conversation about discrimination, respect for veterans, and the rights of service dog handlers. But for now, in this moment, it was just a man and his service dog, standing firm in the face of ignorance and prejudice, about to receive support from an unexpected source. The tension in the lobby reached a breaking point as the manager grabbed her phone, her fingers hovering over the keypad. "I'm calling security right now," she announced loudly, clearly trying to intimidate the veteran. "We don't need your kind causing trouble in our establishment." Her words hung in the air like smoke, causing several guests to gasp. The veteran's hands trembled slightly, but Thunder immediately responded with a trained behavior, gently pressing against his leg. The dog's presence helped ground him, keeping the familiar symptoms of anxiety at bay. "My kind," the veteran repeated quietly, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "I'm curious what you mean by that, ma'am." His calm response made the manager's hostility seem even more inappropriate. A young businesswoman who had been recording the incident spoke up from nearby. "I think we all know exactly what she means, and I've got it all on video." She held up her phone meaningfully, her professional demeanor a stark contrast to the manager's increasing agitation. The manager's face flushed deeper red as she realized more phones were pointed in her direction. "I meant people who try to scam luxury hotels with fake service animals." She sputtered, but her earlier words had already revealed too much. "Let me get this straight," came a new voice. An elderly man in a sharp suit approached from the breakfast area. "You're threatening to call security on a veteran with a perfectly behaved service dog who has a confirmed reservation and proper documentation." The manager lifted her chin defiantly. "He claims to be a veteran, but how do we know that's true? And look at how he's dressed, the designer watch, the expensive clothes. Are we supposed to believe he's really disabled?" A murmur of disapproval rippled through the growing crowd. The veteran stood steady, Thunder a constant reassuring presence at his side. His military training had taught him to handle high-pressure situations, but this was different. This was personal. "You know what?" the veteran said, his voice clear and controlled. "I'd actually appreciate it if you called security. And while you're at it, why don't you call the police too? I'm sure they'd be very interested in this clear violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act." The businesswoman with the phone nodded approvingly. "I've already emailed this video to the hotel's corporate office. I'm an attorney, and what I'm witnessing is textbook discrimination." The manager's phone hand began to shake slightly. "You're all ganging up on me for trying to protect our hotel's standards. How am I supposed to know if this is really a service dog? Maybe the impeccable behavior, the proper service vest, the offered documentation you refuse to even look at." Another guest called out, his voice thick with sarcasm. "Or maybe the fact that this dog hasn't moved a muscle or made a sound despite your increasingly hostile behavior." Indeed, Thunder remained perfectly positioned, demonstrating exactly the kind of training that set legitimate service dogs apart from pets. His focus never wavered from his handler, ready to perform his trained tasks at a moment's notice. The veteran took out his phone, his movements deliberate and calm. "I'm going to call the hotel's corporate number myself. I'd also like to file a formal complaint with the Department of Justice regarding ADA violations. Would you like to continue this conversation with them?" The manager's bravado finally cracked slightly. She looked around at the crowd of witnesses, all clearly supporting the veteran. More phones were recording now, and someone mentioned that the video was already being shared on social media. "You're making a big mistake," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "This is private property, and I have the right to break federal law?" The attorney interrupted. "To discriminate against a veteran with a disability? Please continue. You're only making the case stronger." The veteran felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the beginning of anxiety that often preceded a PTSD episode. But Thunder, trained to detect these early signs, immediately performed a grounding task, providing the support needed to keep his handler centered and calm. The hotel's security officer finally arrived, taking in the scene with professional assessment. Unlike the manager, he immediately noticed Thunder's service vest and the veteran's composed demeanor. The contrast between the calm veteran with his well-trained service dog and the increasingly flustered manager told him everything he needed to know about the situation. What happened next would become a turning point in this confrontation, as years of security experience and proper training came face to face with ignorance and prejudice. The security officer's next words would send this story viral, but not for the reasons the manager had hoped when she made that call. The security officer stepped forward, his face showing a mix of concern and professionalism. He was a tall man with gray hair at his temples, and his eyes took in every detail of the scene. But before he could speak, a strong voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing this situation." A man in his 50s pushed through the crowd, walking with a slight limp. His wife followed close behind, her face tight with anger. "I'm a retired Army colonel, and I've got something to say about this." The manager's expression flickered with uncertainty as the colonel approached. His bearing was unmistakably military, and his voice carried the weight of authority. "This young man has shown remarkable restraint," the colonel continued, gesturing to the veteran. "I've been watching this entire incident, and I haven't seen such a well-trained service dog since my time working with K9 units." Thunder remained perfectly positioned beside his handler, proving the colonel's point. The security officer nodded in agreement, clearly noting the dog's professional behavior. Another voice joined in from across the lobby. "I'm also a veteran," called out a younger woman wearing a Veterans Affairs Hospital ID badge. She walked over, her medical scrubs marking her as a healthcare worker. "I work with veterans who rely on service dogs, and I can tell you this is exactly what a properly trained service animal looks like." The manager's face had lost all color. "I was just following protocol," she began, but the colonel cut her off. "Protocol?" he asked incredulously. "Ma'am, I've stayed at hotels all over the world, and the protocol for service animals is very clear under the ADA. What you're doing isn't following protocol, it's discrimination, plain and simple." The VA nurse nodded vigorously. "Do you know how many veterans I work with who struggle to reintegrate into civilian life? Service dogs like this one make it possible for them to live normal lives, to travel, to attend events, to do everything they fought to protect." The security officer finally spoke up. "Ma'am," he addressed the manager, "I need to remind you that our hotel's policy explicitly states we welcome service animals and we're required by law to provide reasonable accommodation." The crowd had grown larger, with hotel staff members now watching from the edges. The veteran stood quietly, one hand resting on Thunder's head, as more supporters stepped forward. "I'm on the board of a veterans support organization," another guest announced, pulling out a business card. "We'd be very interested in hearing about this incident. In fact, we're always looking for examples of both good and bad practices to share in our training sessions." The manager's phone rang suddenly, making her jump. The caller ID showed it was from the corporate office. The businesswoman who had been recording smiled slightly. "That was quick. I guess my email got their attention. You know what makes this even worse?" The colonel added, addressing the gathered crowd. "This young man did everything right. He has a legitimate service dog, proper documentation, and maintained complete professionalism despite being treated with such disrespect." Thunder chose that moment to perform another trained task, sensing his handler's elevated stress levels. The dog's gentle response drew admiring comments from the onlookers, further highlighting the contrast between his professional training and the manager's unfounded accusations. The VA nurse stepped closer to the veteran. "As a healthcare provider, I'm concerned about the stress this is causing. Would you like to sit down? We can handle this." She gestured to a quiet corner of the lobby where comfortable chairs waited. But the veteran stood his ground, Thunder providing the support he needed. "Thank you, but I need to see this through. Not just for me, but for other veterans who might face the same situation." The security officer pulled out his radio. "I'm calling the hotel's owner directly. This needs to be addressed at the highest level." The manager's phone was still ringing, but she seemed frozen, unable to answer it. The situation had spiraled far beyond her control, transforming from a simple check-in into a moment that would soon spark nationwide attention. What nobody in the lobby realized yet was that this impromptu gathering of veterans and supporters was about to change hotel policies across the country. The next few minutes would demonstrate how a community could come together to stand against discrimination and how one person's prejudice could lead to positive change for veterans everywhere. The video of the confrontation spread across social media like wildfire. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, with comments pouring in from around the country. The luxury hotel's Facebook page was flooded with angry messages, their Instagram flooded with demands for action. Back in the hotel lobby, the manager's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Corporate headquarters was trying to reach her, but she stood frozen, watching as her world crumbled around her. The security footage from multiple angles had already been uploaded to the hotel's internal system, providing even more evidence of her behavior. The veteran's phone was ringing too, news outlets wanting to hear his story. Thunder remained steadfast beside him, offering silent support as always. The other veterans who had stepped up to help were still there, forming a protective circle around him. "Sir," the security officer said, returning from his call with the owner, "the hotel's owner is on his way. He's about 20 minutes out and has asked if you'd be willing to wait in our VIP lounge." He shot a stern look at the manager. Away from any further incidents. The businesswoman who had recorded everything was still there, her phone now buzzing constantly. "The video just hit 100,000 views," she announced. "And I've received calls from 3 major news networks." The hotel's corporate office had gone into crisis mode. Their social media team was overwhelmed with messages, their phone lines jammed with complaints. In their main office, executives huddled in an emergency meeting, watching the footage that was now trending nationwide. "Get me the regional director on the line now," the CEO demanded, his face grim as he watched the video for the 3rd time. "And someone find out everything we can about this veteran. We need to make this right." Back at the hotel, staff members were coming forward one by one, sharing their own stories about the manager's previous behavior. A housekeeper revealed how she'd been reprimanded for helping a disabled guest. A front desk clerk admitted he'd been afraid to stand up to the manager when she'd made similar discriminatory comments before. The regional director's phone was exploding with messages. She'd already called for an Uber and was heading to the hotel, her tablet open to the company's crisis management protocols. But this situation went beyond any scenario they planned for. The veteran sat quietly in the VIP lounge, thunder at his feet. The colonel and the VA nurse had stayed with him, along with several other supporters. Hotel staff members kept appearing with offers of water, coffee, and snacks, their way of showing support without explicitly criticizing their manager. Corporate's response time is impressive, the businesswoman noted, checking her emails. They've already issued a preliminary statement condemning discrimination and promising a full investigation. Outside the hotel, local news vans were starting to arrive. The story had caught fire, not just because of the discrimination, but because of how the community had rallied around the veteran. Social media was full of supportive messages, with hashtag #ServiceDogRights and hashtag #VeteranRespect trending nationwide. The hotel owner arrived before the scheduled time, slightly out of breath from rushing over. His face was a mix of concern and determination as he was briefed on the situation. He immediately headed to the VIP lounge, bypassing the manager completely. Meanwhile, in the corporate office, the PR team was working frantically to draft a comprehensive response. The legal team had already reviewed the footage, and their conclusion was clear: this was a textbook case of discrimination that needed immediate action. The regional director arrived just as the owner was apologizing to the veteran. She carried with her a folder of documents, new policy guidelines that had been rapidly approved by corporate, specifically addressing service animal accommodation and anti-discrimination measures. What started as one manager's discriminatory actions had sparked a corporate revolution in policy and training, but nobody realized yet that this incident would lead to changes far beyond just one hotel chain as the story continued to spread and more people stepped forward to share similar experiences. The next morning, the veteran sat in a downtown law office, thunder still faithfully by his side. The businesswoman who had recorded the incident turned out to be a civil rights attorney, and she had cleared her entire morning schedule to meet with him. On her desk lay printouts of the Americans with Disabilities Act and service animal regulations. "This is one of the clearest cases of discrimination I've seen in years," she explained, spreading out the documents. "We have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and a clear violation of federal law." She paused to offer Thunder a gentle smile as the dog maintained his professional stance beside his handler. The veteran's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since yesterday. Disability rights organizations had reached out offering support. Veterans groups were calling to stand with him. Even military news outlets wanted to cover the story. Through it all, Thunder remained his steady companion, helping him manage the overwhelming attention. In the hotel's corporate headquarters, the legal team was reviewing security footage from the past 6 months. They had discovered something disturbing. This wasn't the manager's first incident of discrimination. Other guests had complained before, but their concerns had somehow never made it up the chain of command. "We've found 3 other incidents involving service animals," the head of security reported, spreading photographs across the conference table. "And 5 more complaints about discriminatory behavior toward minorities." She was very careful to keep these quiet. The hotel's insurance company had already called twice. Their risk assessment team was concerned about potential lawsuits, not just from this incident, but from past guests who might now come forward. The viral video had opened a Pandora's box of legal liability. Back at the law office, the attorney was explaining the scope of the case. "This isn't just about one incident," she said, pulling up more evidence on her computer. "This is about systemic discrimination. The hotel's failure to properly train staff and enforce ADA compliance affects countless guests." Thunder shifted slightly, sensing his handler's stress as they discussed the details. The veteran reached down to stroke the dog's ear, drawing strength from his presence. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," he said quietly. "Other veterans, other service dog handlers, they shouldn't have to fight for their rights every time they travel." The attorney nodded, pulling out another folder. "The Department of Justice has already contacted me. They're very interested in this case. Service animal discrimination cases often go unreported because people don't want to deal with the stress of a lawsuit. But you have something most people don't: irrefutable video evidence." Outside, news crews had gathered. The story had evolved from a viral video to a national conversation about disability rights and discrimination. Veteran organizations were organizing a rally in support of service animal rights scheduled for the weekend. The hotel chain's lawyers arrived at corporate headquarters for an emergency meeting. They carried thick binders of similar cases, precedents, and potential settlements. The CEO sat at the head of the table, his face grave as he reviewed the mounting evidence of systemic issues within his company. "We need to do more than just settle this case," he announced to the room. "We need to completely overhaul our training programs, our policies, and our corporate culture." His words would soon spark changes throughout the hospitality industry. Meanwhile, disability rights advocates across the country were using this incident to push for stronger enforcement of existing laws. Social media was filled with stories from other service dog handlers who had faced similar discrimination. The veterans' stand against injustice had become a rallying cry for change. In the law office, the attorney pulled up one final document on her computer. "The hotel's lawyers have reached out," she said. "They want to settle quickly. But more importantly, they're willing to commit to major policy changes." She turned the screen to show him the proposed terms. Funda looked up at his handler, as if sensing the importance of the moment. This case would set precedents for how businesses handle service animal accommodation. But more than that, it would show others that standing up for their rights could lead to real, lasting change. What began as one manager's discrimination was about to transform into a landmark case for service animal rights and veteran advocacy. The legal consequences would reach far beyond one hotel chain, touching businesses across the country and changing how they approached disability accommodation. 2 months after the incident, the hotel lobby looked very different. A new plaque hung prominently near the entrance, declaring the establishment as service animal friendly and displaying certification from a leading veterans organization. At the front desk, a young staff member was checking in a guest with a service dog, following the new protocols perfectly. The former manager had been terminated immediately after the incident. But more importantly, her dismissal had sparked a complete overhaul of the hotel chain's hiring and training practices. Every employee now underwent comprehensive disability awareness training with special emphasis on service animal accommodation. The veteran stood at a podium in the hotel's grand ballroom, Thunder sitting perfectly beside him. He was addressing a room full of hotel industry executives, sharing his story as part of a new industry-wide initiative on accessibility and inclusion. The settlement hadn't just included monetary compensation, it had demanded real, lasting change. "This isn't about one incident or one person," he explained to the attentive audience. "It's about creating a world where no service dog handler has to worry about being turned away or humiliated." Thunder looked up at him proudly, as if understanding the importance of his words. In the audience, representatives from other hotel chains took notes. The incident had scared them enough to review their own policies. Nobody wanted to be the next viral video of discrimination. But beyond fear of bad publicity, there was a genuine desire to do better. The hotel chain had gone above and beyond the settlement requirements. They'd partnered with veteran organizations to create a comprehensive guide for businesses on service animal accommodation. Their training videos, featuring real service dog handlers sharing their experiences, were being adopted by hotels across the country. At the front desk, a new sign displayed the ADA regulations clearly, along with a QR code linking to resources for businesses and service dog handlers. The hotel staff now included a disability access coordinator responsible for ensuring all guests received appropriate accommodation. "The changes we've seen are remarkable," the veteran continued in his speech. "But what touches me most is how this community came together that day." He gestured to the audience, where several familiar faces sat: the colonel, the VA nurse, and others who had stood up for him that day. The businesswoman turned attorney who had recorded the incident was now consulting with businesses on ADA compliance. Her phone still rang constantly, but now it was companies seeking guidance on how to better serve guests with disabilities. Thunder's story had inspired change beyond the hotel industry. Other businesses had reached out to learn more about service animal accommodation. Schools were using the incident as a teaching moment about discrimination and disability rights. The viral video had become a powerful tool for education. The veteran now spent part of his time visiting other hotels and businesses, sharing his experience and helping them understand the vital role of service animals. Thunder accompanied him everywhere, a living example of the professionalism and importance of service dogs. Social media had played a crucial role in spreading awareness. The hashtags #ServiceDogRights and #VeteranRespect had evolved into a movement, with people sharing their own stories and supporting each other. The incident had given voice to countless others who had faced similar discrimination. The hotel chain CEO stood up to speak next. "We learned a hard lesson," he admitted to the crowd. "But we're grateful for the opportunity to become better." This incident opened our eyes to the need for real systemic change. Looking out over the audience, the veteran felt a sense of pride. What had started as a horrible experience had transformed into something positive. Hotels across the country were changing their policies. Staff were being better trained. And most importantly, other service dog handlers were being treated with the respect they deserved. Thunder wagged his tail slightly as the audience applauded. His handler reached down to scratch his ears, grateful for the partnership that had helped bring about such meaningful change. Together, they had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for understanding and acceptance. What began as one manager's prejudice had evolved into a nationwide conversation about respect, dignity, and the rights of those with disabilities. The incident would be remembered not for its negative beginning, but for the positive changes it inspired in businesses and communities across America.